What Bengal thinks today, India thinks tomorrow. That's Gopal Krishna Gokhale, one of the most respected political thinkers of colonial India, and he said it over 100 years ago. I thought it was just a clever phrase, something people repeat without checking. Then I followed the history, and it stopped sounding clever. It sounded like a law. Bengal built modern India, and then it turned against itself. For a long time, it was the needle on India's compass, until a recent few decades. 800 years ago, Bengal was something the world hasn't seen since. In the 11th and 12th centuries, it was home to Nalanda University, over 10,000 students, 9 floors of library. The world had nothing like it. And Bengal's muslin was so fine, a full length could be drawn through a finger ring. The Mughal called it woven air, and emperors 1,000 miles away paid fortunes for it. Knowledge, wealth, culture. Bengal had all three. What happened next destroyed all three. Around 1203, a Turkish military commander named Bakhtiyar Khilji rode into Bengal. His army ambushed so fast the king barely escaped. Lakshman Sena, by the chronicle's account, fled east. Nalanda was already weakening before he arrived. The dynasty that had sustained it was gone. Earlier raids had taken their toll. But Khilji is the name history remembers, because after him there was nothing left to rebuild. A Tibetan monk, writing 40 years later, described the library burning for months. Months. Hundreds of years of collected knowledge gone. Buddhist monks fled with whatever texts they could carry, and that is how Buddhism left India, the religion born here that had shaped this land for 1,000 years, surviving only in the countries its monks fled to. Khilji's raid didn't just end a dynasty, it closed the book on India's place as the world's center of knowledge. A civilization that had spent centuries perfecting the life of the mind had no answer to a man on a horse with a sword. But the soil was still fertile, and land that has just been emptied does not stay empty for long. The library is gone, the universities ash, the monks scattered. But trade came back and wealth returned. For 5 centuries, sultans and then the Mughal ruled it, and it grew rich enough to clothe emperors in its muslin. By the 1750s, a semi-independent Nawab ruled Bengal, nominally for Delhi, and this time, the people who came for it had no intention of leaving. On June 23, 1757, in Plassey, West Bengal, on one side, there was Siraj-ud-Dawla, the Nawab of Bengal, 50,000 soldiers. On the other, Robert Clive of the East India Company with 3,000 soldiers. The math makes no sense. How does 3,000 beat 50,000? It wasn't just one thing. A monsoon shower soaked the Nawab's gunpowder, while the British kept theirs covered. And then Mir Jafar, Siraj's own military commander, simply didn't move his half of the army. He had secretly agreed to betray the Nawab in exchange for the throne. 3,000 beat 50,000 because 40,000 of those soldiers had already been sold. Plassey's real prize wasn't money, it was a belief. 3,000 had beaten 50,000. So why not all of India? The conquest of the next 100 years began here, in the heads of men who walked off that field certain the whole country could be taken. After Plassey, the British won the right to collect all of Bengal's taxes. Every rupee Bengal produced now flowed through the East India Company. Bengal was the richest province in India, and the British used that money to build armies in Madras and Bombay. And then they came for what was left. Bengal's muslin was undercut by mill-made British cloth flooding the same markets. The weavers who had clothed royal courts across the world lost their work in a generation. And 13 years after Plassey, in 1770, a famine killed 1 crore people in Bengal. 1 crore, 10 million people, under the watch of a company that had just taken the province's entire tax revenue. They could take away the wealth. What they couldn't take was what Bengal did next, because the place that was conquered became the place that fought back hardest. By 1905, Calcutta was India's capital, and Bengal had become the engine of Indian nationalism. The British Viceroy Lord Curzon saw it clearly and decided to break it. He divided Bengal in 2 parts along religion. Administrative efficiency, he said. Indians understood at once. Split the Hindus from the Muslims and the movement breaks. Bengal answered, and the Swadeshi movement spread across the whole country. The partition was reversed in 1911. Curzon lost, and the line failed for a reason he hadn't counted on. He had cut Bengal on religion, but Bengali Hindus and Bengali Muslims shared a language and a culture older than the cut, and they answered in one voice. But in 1906, 1 year after the partition, the All India Muslim League was founded in Dhaka, in East Bengal. The idea behind it was older than the party. Decades earlier, Sir Syed Ahmad Khan had argued that Hindus and Muslims were not one people but 2 nations, 2 peoples who could never fully share a country. He never asked for a separate state, but the idea was loose now, and Curzon's partition gave it its first political home, a party born in Bengal on the premise that the 2 needed to be apart. The British partition lasted only 6 years. The idea it planted lasted 40 more. On August 16, 1946, Jinnah announced Direct Action Day, a show of force for the Pakistan demand. 3 weeks earlier, in Bombay, he had dropped the diplomatic language entirely. We have forged a pistol and we are in a position to use it. In Calcutta, the Bengal government, run by the Muslim League, declared a public holiday and pulled back the police. What followed was 3 days of organized killing. 4,000 dead by the official count, perhaps 2 or 3 times that by the historians. Over 100,000 left without homes. Then it spread to Noakhali in East Bengal. Thousands more killed, 50,000 displaced. Gandhi walked through those villages with a walking stick, an old man alone. Historians have called the Calcutta killings the first bloodshed of the partition. Before August 1946, Patel and Nehru still believed India could stay one country. After Bengal, they accepted partition. The line drawn through Bengal became the line drawn through the subcontinent. This was the moment religious division became a political weapon. And there is an irony buried in it. The Bengali language Curzon couldn't split in 1905, Hindu and Muslim bound by one tongue, would in 1971 break Pakistan in half. East Bengal refused to give up Bengali, and Bangladesh was born from it. The anthem that new nation chose, Amar Shonar Bangla, had been written by Rabindranath Tagore himself, in protest against Curzon's partition 66 years before. What independence looked like for Bengal? Half the land gone. The capital moved to Delhi. The economy broken. The intellectual class split between 2 new countries. That even half of it stayed in India was one Bengali's doing, Shyama Prasad Mukherjee, who pushed to partition Bengal again so its Hindu majority west wouldn't follow the east into Pakistan. And then Bengal did 3 things to itself that made every one of those losses worse. There's an old line in Sanskrit, Vinash Kale Vipreet Buddhi. When ruin comes near, the mind turns against itself. What was Bengal thinking in 1967? That the system was broken and only something more radical would work. The Naxalite movement didn't come from outside the left. It broke away from it. The Naxals were the faction who believed the Communist Party of India, Marxist, had sold out the revolution by going electoral, choosing votes over guns. In a Darjeeling village called Naxalbari, they rose up, farmers and young intellectuals, inspired by Mao Zedong's revolution in China. Land belongs to those who work it. The powerful only respond to force. Violent revolution is the only answer that works. The word Naxal comes from that village. Congress under Indira Gandhi spent years hunting them down. And then so did the CPIM, the very party they'd walked out on. By the mid-1970s, the revolt was crushed in Bengal. But it had already escaped. Within years, it reached Andhra Pradesh, Bihar, Odisha, Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, Maharashtra, the edges of India's poorest, most resource-rich land. At its peak in the 2000s, the Naxalites ran their own taxes, courts, and armed operations across more than 200 districts, a belt that came to be called the Red Corridor. Over 6 decades, 5,000 security personnel killed, 15,000 civilians dead, trillions of rupees in development never built where it was needed most. One Bengal village, nearly 60 years of consequences. By 1977, with the Naxals defeated and the emergency having discredited Congress across India, the CPIM, the party Naxalism had splintered from, swept West Bengal in a landslide. And they were in power longer than anyone expected. And the compass stopped working. The Left Front took West Bengal in 1977 and held it for 34 years. Its face was Jyoti Basu, Chief Minister for 23 unbroken years, the longest any one man had ever governed an Indian state. The same party, the same flags, a whole generation that grew up never once seeing the government change. From the outside, it looked like stability. And at first, the left earned it. In 1978, it launched Operation Barga, officials going village to village to register sharecroppers by name, so no landlord could evict them or seize their share of the crop again. Within a few years, close to 1 million of Bengal's poorest farmers, many of them Dalit, held a legal claim to the land they worked. It was one of the most effective land reforms India had ever seen, and it made the rural poor the left's unshakable base. Up close, it was stagnation. Bengal had been India's industrial heartland. Under the left, that engine ceased. The trade unions grew so powerful that companies couldn't function, and the factories began to leave. Not because they were failing, but because political interference made running them impossible. The economists had a phrase for it: lockout culture. Educated young people left for other states. Government offices, schools, the police, all of it fell under party control. And if you weren't connected to the party, doors simply closed. The party didn't just govern Bengal, it became Bengal's operating system. In 1996, it turned down the country itself. A coalition in Delhi offered Jyoti Basu the Prime Ministership of India, and his own party refused to let him take it. Basu called it a historic blunder and carried it to the end of his life. The one time a man from Bengal might have led the whole country, and Bengal's own ideology said no. The break came in 2007 at a place called Nandigram. The government tried to take farmland for an industrial zone. Farmers protested, and the police fired on the crowd. At least 14 were killed. The party that had handed the rural poor their land had fired on them. That was the end of whatever moral authority remained. So Bengal reached for the other hand. In 2011, Mamata Banerjee swept the left out on 3 words: Ma, Mati, Manush. Mother, Earth, People. The party changed, the disease didn't. The same cadre violence, now with corruption stacked on top, the Saradha scam, which took the savings of people who had nothing, its investigations reaching the inner circle of her own government. 3 ideologies in 60 years: Naxalism, Marxism, populism. Each one promising to fix what the last had broken. Each one leaving Bengal worse than it found it. The same place that once moved all of India, now only moving against itself. And here, the story stops being history. We've caught up to the present, and this last turn isn't finished. It's happening as you watch. In 2026, the Home Minister, Amit Shah, set a date to end Naxalism for good, March 31st. Not a hope, a deadline. He told Parliament the Maoists were broken, a 60-year war now over. The same force had already pushed the communists to the margins of national politics. Bengal voted out the Trinamool Congress and gave the BJP a clear majority. Suvendu Adhikari became Chief Minister, and on March 31st, the central government announced that the Naxalite insurgency had effectively ended, nearly 59 years after an uprising in one Bengal village set off one of the longest internal conflicts in modern Indian history. 2 things wound down within weeks of each other: 6 decades of armed Naxalism, 15 years of one party's rule. This isn't a story about which party is right. The compass doesn't care who's holding it. What matters is whether the needle still works. Which leaves one question: can Bengal become what it was? Look at what it already was. For 800 years, this place has been India's testing ground. Invasion, plunder, the burning of its knowledge, famine, partition, the violence a place turns on itself. None of it took. They burnt the libraries, but they never burnt the seeking. It gave India its saints, Ramakrishna and Vivekananda after him. It gave India Bankim Chandra, who wrote the song A Nation Marched To; Jagdish Chandra Bose, the scientist the world nearly forgot; Ravi Shankar, who carried its music to the world. More Nobel laureates in letters and in economics than any one place should hold. And when the time came to fight, the fighters came from here too. Aurobindo, Khudiram Bose, Subhash Chandra Bose, and the statesmen who argued the republic into shape, Chittaranjan Das and Shyam Prasad Mukherjee. Plundered, its treasures burned, a crore dead in a single famine, and none of it ever stopped Bengal. This place has always been a battlefield, and it never once stopped producing the people who decide what India becomes. What Bengal thinks today, India thinks tomorrow. This chapter isn't finished. Bengal hasn't told us how it ends. If you've made it this far, you already know what to look for.